Your official title, please. I'm sorry to ask you. QA throughout today's presentation. There is a QA menu located to the right of your screen on the GoToWebinar menu. You can submit questions throughout the entire presentation. I will actually go through all questions and ask them to our presenter today. We will address questions halfway through the presentation as well as the end of today's presentation. All lines have been placed on mute. Handouts are available with today's presentation. You will need to utilize the URL that was sent to you in this morning's email reminder. And we will also include the link into the chat box to the right of your screen as well. There are CEUs associated with today's webinar that have been approved by the HCCA for 1.2 CEUs, as well as a HEMA for 1 CEU. A survey, as well as download instructions, will be sent to you tomorrow afternoon. Now it is my pleasure to introduce to you our today's speaker, Phyllis Patrick. Phyllis is the president of Phyllis A. Patrick & Associates, LLC. It is a consulting group specializing in providing strategic planning, security, privacy, and compliance advisory services to the healthcare industry. Phyllis has worked in privacy, security, and compliance at major academic medical centers in New York. She held multiple positions within the New York State and created and directed organizations' compliance programs, including privacy and security programs. Ms. Patrick has many accomplishments. She is a frequent speaker at national and regional conferences and professional organizations such as the HIPAA Summit, AMC Privacy and Security Conferences, HFMA, ATCA, and AHIA, to name a few. Ms. Patrick is certified in healthcare administration and healthcare compliance. She received her BS in psychology from Penn State University and her MBA in healthcare administration from Cornell University. And I am proud to say that Ms. Patrick is serving her first term as a Wolters Kluwer GRC Advisory Board member. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Phyllis Patrick. Phyllis?
Thank you, Maria. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to talk about what I am terming 12 steps to meaningful results, focusing on security risk analysis today, in what I hope will be more of a conversation. So please, if you do have questions or want to make some comments, please do as we go. I will go through several different topics and see, make sure that I can move these slides here. Give me just a moment, please. Okay, our topics for today. Why is risk analysis getting so much attention? Risk analysis has been around for a while, and I think it's a term that is used perhaps inappropriately at times, and it's also misunderstood. There's a mythology around risk analysis. We're going to talk about the process itself, development and implementation of it, how you can scale a risk analysis to fit your organization, because each organization is different, and that is one of the beauties of the security rule, is that it is scalable and flexible. We're going to talk about meaningful results and also an ongoing process. How do you maintain a risk analysis, risk management process on an ongoing basis that will meet not only the regulatory requirements, but also the needs that your organization has? Following all of this, we will also have a demonstration of some tools and methods for risk analysis. And at that point, I will turn it over to Lynn. The next slide, slide number 3, why the attention? And some of the information that I will be giving today, or some of the discussion that I'll be having with you, is basic. So I do want to say at the outset that if you're very, very familiar with a security rule, you may say, well, I know all of this already. But we're actually going to go over some of these basics because I think what happens is that people make it more complicated and sometimes lose sight of what this rule is all about. So some of the information will be basic, and I will go through it fairly quickly. But what I would really like to leave you with is the concept that you can develop a program that meets your requirements. And don't worry so much about, should I pick this model for risk analysis? Should I pick that model? What it really comes down to is risk analysis needs to be embedded in your organization. It can be done as part of an overall enterprise-wide risk analysis. It doesn't have to be separate for security, but we'll go through some of those topics. Risk analysis and risk management clearly are key standards within the security rule. And as we all know, the security rule has been in effect since 2005. Some organizations took it very seriously in the beginning, implemented all of the standards, including the risk analysis and the risk management requirements. Other organizations had done a lot with implementing privacy and held back a bit on security. I think we also had a period of time where enforcement and the eye of the government were less upon us in terms of HIPAA requirements. And so some of us got lax, or we instituted some policies, but we kind of let it go, and we went with sort of a generic model, if you will. Now, of course, with what's happened with the new laws and with the Omnibus Rule, which is brand new, but really no surprises there, with the Office for Civil Rights audit process, meaningful use, in order to attest for meaningful use funding, you must indicate that you have, in fact, completed a risk analysis and that you've also developed and mitigated some of those risks, or at least that you are on the way and that you have a process in place. The other aspect is breaches and enforcement actions. When an enforcement action happens based on a breach, based on an investigation, based on a patient complaint, the Office for Civil Rights is looking much more closely at, have you completed a risk analysis? Again, it's one of those major standards within the security rule. So for all of these reasons, and I think also because people are getting more serious about it, and because we've seen the security profession evolve within healthcare, it's no longer simply a matter that you can take someone in IT who really knows little about security in many cases and say, okay, today you're our security officer, John, and off you go. It doesn't work that way anymore. And so the profession itself is also saying, we as security professionals are looking for something more. We're looking for a program that is more robust than HIPAA. We have other requirements. We use credit cards, so we have PCI requirements. We have research requirements and so forth. And let's all remember that HIPAA really is the floor. So the security rule is one of the components of your overall information security program, but it is by no means the only thing that you need. Okay, just a brief legislative history here to again remind all of us of the basic rules and where they have been and where they've come from. We have had HIPAA since 1996, coming up on 20 years now. That's kind of amazing. The privacy rules and the security rules, 10 years, getting into 10 years. High tech in 2009. And we've been living under some of those major provisions, including the breach reporting and notification rule, and some of the other requirements related to meaningful use and so on. And now in 2013, and effective for compliance will be this September, the Omnibus Rule. The components that the government uses to enforce compliance and also to build more integrity into these programs include audits, complaints, and the complaint process will be changing under Omnibus. As we know, consumers are more engaged now. Patients want more information. They want to have access. They want to make sure that you are, in fact, protecting their information. So any complaints that come in are investigated. Some of those investigations then become full-blown audits. There are compliance reviews. There are breach reports. There are a number of types of actions that are now occurring and occurring with more and more frequency as the enforcement is being stepped up. We have only to look at recent breaches, large breaches, to see, in particular, there have been some significant ones involving different aspects of security. And an interesting point that was made at HIPAA Summit recently was that I believe it's 7 of the last major 11 enforcement actions were out of the Seattle area office. So if you're a West Coast Seattle area, it must be that your office, your OCR office, and other people out there are really digging into this stuff. But no matter where you are, basically OCR has stepped up enforcement. In fact, right now they're hiring more people to help in this process as well. So high tech, as we know, was a catalyst. Again, it brought back the fact that some of us as organizations were not doing everything that we needed to do to meet the basic requirements, particularly of the security rule. So again, all of these things work together in terms of meaningful use, the audit program, health information exchanges becoming more important, not just for hospitals, but if you are a privacy and/or security officer and you're not involved, then please, please make sure that you get involved, because it's going to be very, very important as you go forward in your privacy and security programs. There's also this emphasis on patient engagement and providing information directly to patients. And many of the rules that are coming out for meaningful use, the Office of the National Coordinator and some of those initiatives are really focusing on providing access and transparency and information directly to patients. Let's talk about some key concepts and principles that are related to this concept of risk. So I will go through some of these again. Some of these are basic. Some of these, excuse me, are concepts that have been around for a while. If you've been involved in risk management, this will not be new to you, but it is the language of risk that we do use to look at security and privacy. Some of the basic terms are on this slide. I just wanted to point out, we use these terms all of the time. The question is, do we really know what they mean, and do we really use them appropriately? In terms of mitigation, mitigation is a word that we use very, very frequently now, and it really deals with what is the extent of the exposure and how likely is it that something has happened or something could happen. How do you reduce that? So for instance, if I am a healthcare provider and I'm using a laptop that is not encrypted, really the very easy way that I can reduce the likelihood of something occurring if I do have patient information on that laptop is to encrypt it. And encryption has been the focus also of recent enforcement actions, and the OCR has also stated publicly that they are expecting more encryption, expecting to see encryption. The encryption technology has changed tremendously in the few years also that the security rule has been in place. So it is much more expected, even though it is considered to be an addressable standard within the rule. Risk management, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the slides in a couple of minutes, basically deals with identifying what are your risks and analyzing those risks, analyzing them to the extent that you can say this topic or this area is more of a risk for us than something else. Again, it depends upon your situation, your organization, what are your goals, what are the major components of your programs. What are some of the strategies that you can put in place? You can assume the risk, accept it, and say, we'll live with it. If something happens, then we will deal with it. Avoid the risk. You can transfer the risk. Normally, when we think of risk transfer, we think of insurance and insurance policies, such as a cyber insurance policy or other type of policy. But really, what are the various strategies that your organization uses to mitigate risk? And this applies not only to the area of security, but other types of risk within your organization. If you're an auditor, you deal with risk on a frequent basis. If you're a risk manager, if you work in the quality area. So risk is not a new concept for us in healthcare, but again, I just want to emphasize there are some very basic concepts, and let's not make this more complicated than we really need to. So on the next slide, what are some of the hot topics and trends that are affecting risk in healthcare right now? Excuse me. As I mentioned, encryption. And encryption is almost a get-out-of-jail-free card, as we like to say. And in some cases, it will make the difference between your organization having a breach or having lost a laptop or have something happen, but not having to report that, not having to mitigate that, because encryption is the best mitigation strategy that you can possibly come up with, whether it's a desktop, a laptop, a cell phone, etc. Another very, very hot topic, and if you look at the trends and some of the surveys, any major survey of information security officers today, number 1, 2, or 3 topic is mobility, mobile devices, BYOD. Everybody is talking about this. I have yet to see a technology that really meets the needs of healthcare providers in terms of mobility and mobile devices. However, I can tell you that, and in fact I saw something just earlier this week, there is a lot of work being done in research areas and computing areas to be able to bring this to the market, to the table, because in healthcare, this is probably our greatest fear. You have physicians and nurses and other clinicians who are texting, and it's not a secure way to do it, or it's not set up to be secure. And this could be your worst nightmare, because one of those devices could be lost, could be stolen, could be misplaced, and texting information about a patient's condition does show up. It is retained on most devices, and so this is a problem. Cybersecurity. The President has recently announced some new initiatives in terms of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is also a phenomenon that is not just affecting other countries stealing defense and other types of intelligence from our governmental type computers. It's also people looking to steal identities, identity theft, medical identity theft, trade secrets. In the case of healthcare entities that are engaging in research, there have been a number of cybersecurity incidents where major research devoted to either clinical or something similar to that, patents and so forth, can be suspected. It is a suspected activity in terms of cybersecurity. So cybersecurity also, and how do you protect yourself against that? That's a new term, but it's a term that we are hearing in healthcare. Of course, electronic health records. Electronic health records provide a lot of benefits for the organization, and again, the ONC, the President, other aspects of government are saying we really want everybody to be on electronic health records. We really want to have a national system of access to records, be you a clinician, a patient, etc. We see it in some situations, some organizations, the VA, for instance, but it is spreading. It's not happening overnight, but it is spreading, and of course, meaningful use is there to help that, all of those monies that were put in, the $30 billion plus. So again, health information exchanges, Blue Button Plus, that is also a few years ago we saw the beginnings of personal health records, but it was very labor intensive for the patient or for the individual. They had to put in their own information. Blue Button Plus, which is now coming out, enables automatic populating of information so that I as a patient or I as an individual do not have to put in all my information. So it's becoming much more user-friendly. And again, consumer engagement. If you look at the goals of the CMS for meaningful use, one of their 5 primary goals is consumer engagement. Cloud computing, again, with storage requirements, with trying to move away from managing some of the basic activities at the local level. Some healthcare providers are using cloud computing. Some are staying totally away from it. So it's sort of a love-hate relationship, if you will. But we also know now that under Omnibus that cloud computing providers are in fact business associates. And we also know that for a while some of the cloud computing providers did not want to sign business associate agreements. So if you're working with a cloud computing provider, if you're thinking about it, now you've got some clarity with Omnibus. And of course, big data. And I want to say a few more things about big data. Big data is a term that we're hearing now, and basically what it really means is that there are more types of data being collected from more people in more ways and shared with more entities. And we see this in healthcare. You see it in your personal life as well. Again, it's changing at a very, very rapid rate. We have a lot of digital data. We have data now, and it's coming to healthcare as well. It isn't in healthcare in terms of personal preferences and individual behavior. We may, we think of the applications, for instance, that a major department store like a Macy's has. When you walk in and you have your cell phone and they know you and they can say, Mary, we're having a sale on, such and such today. Please come to this department and so forth. Well, the same kind of behavior and individual preferences, there's work being done on that in the healthcare arena as well. And of course, government collection agencies, the IRS, the Census Bureau, Homeland Security. Again, all of this has changed dramatically in the last 5 years. All of us are involved in this. We see all of this. We have a number of things happening in terms of other countries, the European Union, the third pillar, counterterrorism, and so forth, and surveillance. And let me stop for a moment and talk just a little bit more about surveillance, because one of the major standards within the security rule deals with physical safeguards, which we'll also talk about in a little bit more depth. And physical safeguards, we have thought in terms of, okay, you lock your file cabinets, you lock your door, and so forth, keep that data center secure. But it also means such things as cameras and GPS and all types of other devices that are being used in healthcare as well as in the rest of our lives. And also this major combining of databases, huge databases. So let's talk for a few minutes now about the security rule. Again, some of this information, if you're working with a security rule, if you are a security officer, you'll be very, very familiar with this. But again, I want to emphasize some of these basics because sometimes we get out there doing something and we kind of need to pull ourselves back and say, okay, this is what the security rule is really all about, because it really comes down to a very, very few basics. The security rule has standards and it has what are called implementation specifications. And the standards are such things as security management process. What does that mean? We'll talk a little bit about that. Another standard is assigned security responsibility, a required standard. In other words, there must be someone in your organization who is charged with the responsibility for coordinating security. Not that they're totally responsible, because everyone is responsible, but someone needs to be a focal point for that. And so forth. Most of the standards within the security rule really have nothing to do with IT. And so we always like to say, the IT is not responsible for security. And again, as I've said before, you can't just take an IT person and say, okay, tomorrow you're the security officer, because security is a whole profession unto itself. Implementation specifications. Implementation specifications are within each of the standards, or most of the standards within the security rule, and they basically lay out how you implement that standard. So, for instance, under the standard of workforce security, the implementation specification, authorization. In other words, how do you authorize access to systems? So it gives you more specificity in terms of what you must do in order to make sure that that standard is met. The addressable versus required. Again, we've heard this for a long time. Addressable is not optional. It means that you must look at each of these specifications and you must develop something for your organization, or if it doesn't make sense, you must document why you have not. And here I want to point out, again, encryption. Encryption is still listed as an addressable requirement, or addressable implementation specification within the security rule. However, if you address encryption today versus addressing encryption in 2005, your response to that will be very different. And I think it would be very hard to go through the assessment of how do we implement encryption, can we not implement encryption. By doing that analysis, looking at the cost of encryption today, the ease of encryption today, the concerns about breaches that encryption can really take care of, it would be very hard to say that you would not want to or not be able to implement encryption. So that's just one example, but it has to be an analysis that makes sense for your organization. Documentation requirements, as with any of these rules and standards, very, very important. documenting not only that you have the policy, but that you've communicated the policy, that you have approved the policy. If you do get audited, they're looking for those kinds of things. So you want to make sure you have it in an easy format, an easy, retrievable way of saying we are meeting this rule, and we're doing more than just paying lip service and having documents in a binder or documents on the internet. And in the middle, I've put safeguards, because safeguards are really the crux of the security rule and the crux of any security program. Even if you look at high trust, if you look at ISO, if you look at COBIT, it all boils down to what types of safeguards are you using, what do you have in place to protect that information. Types of safeguards. Again, the security rule identifies 3 different types of safeguards. So let's review this in a little bit more detail and talk about some types of safeguards or some examples of safeguards. This definition of administrative safeguards comes right from the rule. And basically, if you look at the administrative safeguards within the security rule, that represents more than 50% of the requirements of the rule. So again, it's not technical. This is policies and procedures, but it's also how you manage your program, how you select, how you measure, how you maintain various measures, and what about your workforce? How do you make sure that your workforce understands how they protect information? What are the do's, what are the don'ts? How do they go about that? Physical safeguards. Physical safeguards also represent a major component of the rule. And here we're talking about physical measures, policies, and procedures. It's your buildings, it's your equipment, and protecting it from a variety of hazards. And in the case of some of the standards in the rule, it basically is saying that you want to make sure that everyone who is involved or who should be, for instance, in the data center, that they have been authorized to be there. So we see data centers taking on new types of physical safeguards today versus, say, 10 years ago, with much more managed systems of egress and so forth. Technical safeguards. Again, and I've provided the actual sections for you at the bottom of these slides, so if you want to just Google and type that in, you can see the actual language. Technical safeguards involve technology, but also policies and procedures that govern the use of that technology. And in the major technical safeguards, if you will, within the rule, deal with auditing and also with access monitoring and account, setting up accounts for people and how is that handled. So again, the technical aspects of the security rule, the audit controls and the access controls, are the 2 major categories there. But they make up less of the bulk of the rule. All of these, of course, are important and they all work together. But remember, there are many, many other components to this rule. What is the security management process? If you look at the security rule in detail, you'll see that that is the very, very first standard within the rule. And that really is where you have to start. If you're a small entity or if you're even a larger entity, and maybe this is the right time to sort of revisit how do you look at security within your organization and reintroduce the concept, if you will, of a security management process. There are 4 major standards within the rule that sit underneath this, or implementation specifications, I shouldn't be saying, I'm sorry. The risk analysis, the risk management, sanction, and also evaluating and looking at our systems by tracking them on a regular basis, whether it be audit logs or access reports or some way of tracking how are people using the information, is it appropriate, and how do we review it. So risk analysis, the requirement, and again, right from the rule, and this rule, again, as I say, it's so flexible, it's really very straightforward, very clear. I know some people want to see more checklists and more definition of what should I do, what should I not do. But this rule is really established in such a way that you can make it very, very meaningful for your organization. You just, look at it in terms of a strategic planning process. What do you need to do to make it accurate and thorough? And if you've been with your organization for a while, you know what an assessment is, what an assessment needs to do in order to look at what are the risks and the vulnerabilities. Most healthcare organizations will have some similar risks, and then other organizations will have some different risks depending upon what technology they have, how their workforce has been trained, how large they are, what type of entity they are. The business associates, as we know, must now meet all of these requirements as part of the Omnibus Rule. But again, I'll say this is probably one of the most misunderstood standards, and we're going to go through some of the things, hopefully, that will demystify this a little bit. And interestingly, many surveys, including HIM surveys and others, still show that there are about 50% of covered entities that are not doing risk analysis on a regular basis. So risk analysis really provides the foundation for your program. And if you want to have more than a reactive program, and you want to have a solid program and a program that goes beyond HIPAA, then clearly risk analysis is a key component. And we may often hear that people will say, I don't have enough resources to do this. And again, that's no excuse, and certainly no excuse when OCR comes to call, but really is no excuse because you don't have to make it complicated, and you can leverage and use resources within the organization if you need to. What are some of the approaches? Talk a little bit more, do a little bit deeper dive in terms of some of the tools, and again, the keywords of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, the CIA concept as we call it. The terminology of risk in this sense, we talk about threats. A threat can be a flood. It can be someone trying to break into your office. It can be a natural disaster, etc. What is a vulnerability? A vulnerability is some sort of weakness that could result. Again, perhaps an unencrypted laptop or an office door left open and some pathology reports left in a drawer that could easily be taken by someone. A risk occurs when a vulnerability is exploited by a threat. So you've got something there that presents a threat to you. The threat basically occurs, and again, depending upon how you're mitigating, how you're safeguarding your information, and how you're training your people, it can be a major risk or it can be much less of a risk. And again, as I mentioned earlier, what are some of the strategies in terms of risk mitigation, managing it, avoiding it, transferring it, and so forth. So there are several good resources out there for risk assessment and risk management. These are just a few that I want to point out, and some of them have been out there for a while. Prior to the Office for Civil Rights having responsibility for enforcement of the security rule, many of us will remember that it was actually CMS. And one of the initial things that they did was they put together a whole series of HIPAA Security 101, which for a while those documents were hard to find, but they are still around. And they are very, very good. There's one for the small provider. They also have guidance on remote access. There's a section, a report, one of the series here in terms of risk assessment. And it's very straightforward, very easy to understand. It's something you could give to your committee, you could give to a variety of people, and it's very clear in terms of what's needed. There's also now some guidance and actually a whole campaign, if you will, in terms of mobile device, some good and all free information that CMS is putting out there. These processes are critical. They're critical, obviously, because we need them to meet the requirements of the rule. We need them in order to maintain our meaningful use criteria, our funding, and pass those types of audits. And the meaningful use audits, if you haven't heard about them, they are occurring, and there will be more. And again, this is a massive program. This is more than $30 billion that the government is giving out to providers, hospitals, and professionals who are eligible over many years. And so they want to make sure that that money is being used appropriately. And failure to meet one criteria within the meaningful use group, and one criteria could be that you checked, yes, we've completed a risk analysis, when in fact you haven't, And that could mean that you have to give all that money back. So this is serious and becoming more serious. The evaluation standard, this is something that when I was first a security officer, I did first before I actually did risk analysis. And really, I think the evaluation standard, it brings it more to the strategic level. If you think about the evaluation standard, this is something that any organization, again, doesn't have to do as a standalone analysis for security. This fits very, very well with the annual cycle or whatever your cycle is for strategic planning. There should be a component within the strategic plan that looks at what has changed, both technically and non-technical, environmental changes, operational changes that have affected the security of our information. And some easy examples are, you now have a mobile device policy and you're allowing mobile devices where maybe 2 years ago you didn't. That's a major change in your environment. It's a major change in the way you're operating. So that's something that needs to be included in the overall strategic planning for the organization, not just within the concept of the security program. The evaluation standard, again, it's one of the most overlooked. People really don't document how they're complying with it. But I will say to you that if you include it in your overall strategic planning, you've got tremendous documentation if you have a good strategic planning process within your organization. It can be the overall strategic planning. It can be part of the IT planning. It can be part of performance improvement planning. It doesn't have to be standalone. The more that you integrate security rule requirements into other aspects of your organization, and the more you leverage those other resources and get the other departments involved, the better your program, the better your documentation, the better the understanding, and then you really begin to see that the culture understands and accepts that security and privacy are in fact major components of what you do. This slide will just very quickly indicate, if you're not familiar, the National Institute of Standards and Technology is an organization that puts out a tremendous number, has a very extensive library of all free and very useful documents. And this is just one example that I've listed here that they put out some time ago. But now they have several documents on cybersecurity. They have documents on mobile devices. Some of their documents are quite technical, but even if you give them a cursory review, you can pick up a lot and learn a lot and apply that to your security program. Some of the security rule is based on NIST, and remember, the security rule is the floor, so at some point your security program has to involve more than the security rule, so you need to select a model, be it using NIST more, being ISO, high trust, etc. These are all different models. So before we go to the meaningful results and the 12 steps that I've outlined, do we have any questions?
Hi, Phyllis. It's Maria. We do have one question. It's a little lengthy, so I will go slowly and ask that to you. If a standard has one or more implementation specifications, does satisfying those implementation specifications necessarily satisfy the standard? Or should we interpret the standard more broadly than just the implementation specifications?
Okay, well, that's a very good question. And actually, I would say it's both because, for instance, if you look at security management process, and as I had on a previous slide, it has 4 implementation specifications. So it's risk analysis, it's risk management, it's a sanction policy, and it's information system activity review. If you've done all of those and you feel good that you've got good processes in place, good policies, and so forth, in a sense, yes, you have met that overarching standard that's referred to as security management process. But I would probably want to take it a little bit further and make sure that I have an identifiable information management process or program. And so I would consider you're almost there, but I'd like to see just a little bit more. Technically, I think you could say yes if you meet those implementation specifications. But remember, too, some of the standards don't have implementation specifications under them, and some of them do. But very good question. I hope I was able to give some insight there.
Thanks, Phyllis. And as you were answering that question, a few more have come in, so we'll address them now.
Okay.
The next question from the attendee is, would you explain the evaluation standard a bit more?
Okay. Well, you know, it's interesting, and I know the person who authored this. I actually have worked with and continue to work with one of the authors of the security rule. The evaluation standard, as I understand it, was put in there sort of at the outset. And the concern here was that, okay, you can do a risk analysis, but again, some people may focus that risk analysis on some technical measures, perhaps some physical measures, but you get a little bit more specific when you're looking at risk analysis, because you say, okay, we have these risks, and our committee, our group, our survey shows that everyone thinks that these are the top 3 risks. Then we have a plan to mitigate those risks, you know, encryption of our devices, or you know, more training or whatever. But the evaluation standard really forces you to look at what's changing. So I think, to me, it's like that value add, but it's that periodic check, because evaluation extends beyond risk analysis. So, for instance, an operational change. An operational change could be that you have a new CEO, a new executive team, and they have different priorities. Again, I liken the evaluation standard more to a strategic planning process, if you will. And if you look at, again, at the wording, it's a periodic. Now, periodic could be annual, it could be more or less. With mobile devices these days, some people are looking at their strategies on a quarterly basis, or at least twice a year, because things are changing so quickly. Your disaster recovery, if you have a good plan in place, maybe that's something that you reevaluate every other year. Again, it depends upon your organization. So a technical and a non-technical, and as it says, based initially upon the standards and implemented and so forth. But again, your program will change over time, and your policies and your processes and how people view the security program should be very different from today than what it was, say, in 2004, when we were just sort of starting out in terms of trying to meet these standards. So I think that the evaluation standard, it speaks more about environmental and operational changes, what affects security. So it is different, but you can include evaluation, as I mentioned, in your overall organization strategic planning process. Certainly, and that would be the ideal way to do it, because if you're not including security in the overall organization's strategic planning process, then why not? You know, it makes no sense. The same thing with enterprise-wide risk assessment, risk management. If security or security breach is not on that risk profile, then, you know, I think that something's being missed. So I guess I better stop there, because I know we have other questions. But I hope that I was able to answer that in a little bit more detail. If anyone wants to, submit a question later, we can also get back with more information.
Thanks, Phyllis. I will entertain one more question, and then we'll get back to the presentation. And then for everyone attending, please feel free to put in your questions, and I will ask them to Phyllis as they come in at the end of the presentation. So here's the last question, Phyllis. If the organization uses hybrid or all paper records, will protection of these documents need to be included in the physical safeguards, as the security rule is intended to be, quote unquote, technology neutral?
Yes, because, and if we look at some of the breaches and some of the things that have occurred, we still see a number of breaches and a number of issues that involve paper records. As an example, taking records on a subway, leaving them on a subway. There was a case recently in Massachusetts, or actually more than a year ago now. Paper records are still a major source of breaches, major source of concern, and locking them up, storing them appropriately, not having them out in the open. Yes, I mean, that is meeting the physical safeguard requirements of the security rule.
Thanks, Phyllis. And to be mindful of everyone's time and your presentation, let's proceed with the presentation.
Okay, so now let's talk about meaningful results, because that really is our goal here. and how you go about it. And I broke this into 12 steps. I mean, you can, again, use these steps any way that you like. There could be more steps, there could be sub-steps, etc. But basically, the first thing is, I think you need to plan your approach. And if you're new to security, or if you're a security officer, and again, you're trying to reinvigorate your program, you want to take it beyond your IT group or beyond, the privacy and compliance office, really make sure that you understand what the requirements are. Understand your stakeholders. Your stakeholders really vary across your organization, be it physicians who are doing a lot with the texting and so forth, or be it the security guard, the physical security people. Enlist champion, at least a champion from senior leadership, and that's true of any program. We have worked in hospitals for a long time, know that it's very hard to have a program progress and really become integrated within your culture unless you have that senior leadership. Collaborate with your peers. If you're a security officer, attend, at least do webinars, ways to keep your skills up, certification, etc., and collaborate with other people who are doing what you're doing. And incorporate, as I mentioned before, incorporate the risk assessment, risk management process for security privacy into enterprise risk management, if it makes sense. Some organizations are doing that, some are not. I've often seen the enterprise risk management be a compliance and audit initiative, but again, security is seen differently, and to me, it's also a risk. So why not do it all under the same umbrella? Number two is understand the organization's risk appetite. If you're new to the organization, I think you need to spend some time and sort of, listen to, what is the culture here? Do we want to do everything right, and do we pull out all the stops in order to make that achievable? Do we have a lot of policies? Do we have clear, concise policies? What is the way that your organization goes about this? Some organizations are more risk averse than others. Some just say, we just don't have the time, the resources, we'll do what we can do, but, hopefully nothing will happen. If it does, when it does, we will deal with it. That really is no longer an appropriate response, because as we know with breaches, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And we know also that there are some breaches that don't get reported, and there'll probably be more reporting in the future. The other aspect of this that is changing, and Omnibus really puts the cap on this, if you will, is the consumer piece and the patient piece. And remember, the Omnibus Rule, the whole goal of the Omnibus Rule is really to provide privacy protections to patients and to individuals, and to really bring together all of this into one patient-centric model, if you will. So patients will be challenging. They will have the right to sue, to press actions, and so forth. So saying that we want to just accept it, whatever happens, but again, if you're doing a risk analysis, you're doing some sort of interview process or survey process as part of that, you're updating perhaps something that you did a couple of years ago, you really do need to talk to people, and you need to listen to people. And it comes back to, what really is keeping everybody up at night. Just a very basic example, what is your individual risk appetite? Here, the flood, obviously some people have been involved in floods recently. We've had some really catastrophic storms. People build in places that are flood prone. That's a personal decision. That's something, that an individual or a family makes that decision. And so how vulnerable are you, and what do? Just, again, avoid an area that you think might be prone to flooding. Do you do your homework and say never build there? Or do you do it anyway because that's where you really want to be and you think nothing will happen, and you buy flood insurance? So again, just a very basic example. Again, as we've mentioned, and it's right in the rule, this is a technology neutral rule. And over time, as we get more technology within our organizations, I think the security rule, again, provides a floor, but we are seeing other types of federal and state legislation that will make us move in different directions, I guess is the best way to say it in terms of our programs. And a good example is PCI, the credit card industry. If you do utilize credit cards within your organization, you need to meet PCI requirements. Is that something that you have tested in your organization? Because you need to move beyond HIPAA. There's no one size that fits all. There's no totally secure system. Again, how big are you? How complex are you? What kind of information are you using? We still have some providers that are all paper. We have some that are hybrids. What will it cost you? How much can you afford? These are all questions that need to be weighed, but it has to be a group think. It really has to be a discussion during that risk analysis phase that all of these factors are considered, and that people understand that you don't necessarily have to have the most sophisticated, the most expensive system in place. And as an example, for auditing purposes, there are vendors out there that have very, very sophisticated and very expensive products that people are using to audit access to records. In your budget, if you have that kind of money, I would be tempted to look at, again, I don't know that I need to audit every single record and I need to have all this sophisticated software to do it. Maybe it's more important that I have encryption on devices. Okay? You have to weigh those various risks, and with limited resources, if you do have a decent budget at all, you can't get everything. So maybe it's better to do less auditing and random type auditing, but do it well and document it, than it is to try to cover every base when you've got some other risks out there that could be mitigated perhaps at less cost or certainly no more than what you have in your budget. Set your objectives. What is the end result? Again, this is very much a strategic planning process in terms of developing and expanding and enhancing a security program. It's not just a set of policies. It's not just, okay, we've got our security program and every year we do our training and so on and so forth. We just keep repeating the same thing. This is a dynamic cycle. This is a dynamic process, and it is part of what you do as an organization. It is part of what you are saying in your notice of privacy practices, your contract, if you will, with the public, that you are saying, we protect your information. So this is important. Again, is it the first time? If you're a small provider, perhaps this is the first time you've really done a risk analysis, so you take a different approach. What's the experience of the team? It should be a team approach. It's not just one person doing risk analysis. Set some realistic objectives. Have a time frame. Some objectives will be on an annual cycle, some less, some more so, and so forth. If you are small, start small. It's better that you have something in place and that you are, in fact, doing this in a very mindful way and documenting it and improving. That is much more substantial and much more forgiving, if you will, if you do get into a situation where either you get audited or you have a breach. The enforcers look much more kindly on those types of situations because they know that you do have a process, you have a rationale, and you are moving ahead, even if you don't have all of the latest, whiz-bang whatevers. Gain support for the process. Again, this is not a new concept. It's not that long ago that we thought of risk management in terms of malpractice insurance, but really risk, a chief risk officer or an office of risk. Risk is something that is discussed in a lot of different departments. It means different things to some people, but basically it all comes down to the same types of definitions, if you will. And help your constituents to understand that privacy and security really are directly related to this, to your culture. That it's, just as you want to be a safe hospital, you want to have a quality improvement plan, you also want to make sure you're maintaining privacy and security. So it's not just about regulation. And use all the opportunities that you have to educate and increase awareness, making simple, straightforward statements at different meetings. It's like advertising, the same theme, but in simple, small doses. So you do want to enlist others, whether you're a large organization or a small organization. Get the key stakeholders. Also get the naysayers. Put them on your committee or on your work group because that gives you the opportunity to understand and to learn from them as to what their concerns are, but also hopefully for them to understand that this is more about just having a few policies or doing an annual training. The people that are what I call good thinkers within your organization, those who are thoughtful, those who have knowledge and expertise, obviously a cross-section. Ideally, you want to handpick some of these people because you want to get the best. You want to get people that also will provide good information and good perspectives and give you sort of a check, if you will. So in this mode, the security officer really becomes a listener with people of different skills augmenting and assisting in that process. An effective security officer does not have to be a very, very technical person. They need a lot of other skill sets as well. Technical, yes, that's great, but they also need negotiation, facilitation skills, and other skills to bring to bear on this process. Who's on your team? And again, as part of leveraging the resources, make sure that you have senior leaders as champions, that you prepare people. The worst thing is to have OCR show up and to say, okay, we'll send you to our HIPAA person. I mean, the executive team should also be able to speak some of this language. They won't know all of the details that you, perhaps as a security officer, will, but they need to be able to articulate it. And that means that it needs to be discussed at management meetings and so forth. Again, I think this is a very good time, if you haven't done it already, especially with Omnibus. This is a great time to reinstate and re-energize, whether you had a committee, you disbanded it, you could establish a new committee, a steering group, however it works, but you need some sort of a structure within your organization. And this is aside from a board level committee. I'm talking now a group within, department managers, maybe some frontline people, people that really can understand and bring some good skills to this as well. Assign people based on their expertise and their ability to participate, not because they're the director of this department or that department. Select a model. By this I mean select a model for your risk analysis. Again, I highly recommend that CMS document on risk analysis. There are some other good ones as well, but do you want to do a quantitative or qualitative risk assessment? Some people get into very sophisticated quantitative models. If you've got the time for that, that's great, but sometimes it becomes sort of more of an exercise, if you will. And, what's the outcome? What's the output? What are you going to do with all of that? So I'd rather see a more simplistic, straightforward process involving people, surveying, interviewing, talking to people, getting the information, what's happening on the outside, what are the other threats, what are your colleagues saying, what are you learning from your professional organizations, and then have a group think in terms of rating and looking at all the various risk factors. Is this a high probability in our organization or a low probability? You can do it as part of a group dynamic. You can do it with a lot of complexity and rigor. You can do it with less. Again, it has to fit your culture, your organization. If you're looking at models in terms of security models in general, again, we've mentioned NIST, COBIT, high trust. You also, when you're selecting a model and as you're developing this process, or maybe you're changing the process from what you did previously, you really want to think about what will the outcome of this be? What are the options? Before you start putting a very complex process in place and then come to the end and say, oh, well, what do we really have here? So that's why I say look ahead and figure out what you think may come out of it or what you'd like to see come out of it. And, of course, keep it simple. There are a variety of standards, frameworks, and taxonomies that you can use. Again, and the HIPAA security rule is basically the floor, but there are a number of others, very well recognized. Trained security professionals are very well versed in these. Auditors in particular use COBIT, and I think if you have a strong internal audit department, you don't even have to have IT auditors. If you do, that's great, but auditors who really understand this can really, really assist a security officer in doing their job and making sure that the program is working, because it brings that neutral, independent view to the security program that you as the security officer or you as the privacy officer may not see, and it's great when you get that other component. These are all important, and they're important because they provide structure and they provide a method for you to use, and they also provide credibility and legitimacy to your program. Then you develop the process, and basically you need a work plan. We all know what this means. Who's responsible? What's the timeline? Do you time your risk analysis process around your regular annual strategic planning and budgeting cycle? What about your board and your committees? You want to be able to communicate with them. The audit and compliance cycle. This may be, the appropriate time. So again, it will vary by organization. You want to communicate that plan, and you want to make sure that you communicate progress on a regular basis. So if your risk analysis process is something that you do on an annual basis, you have a startup, you have a process, you have some products and some documentation and some outputs and results. So, that should become, just a regular method of doing it. And if you've got some simple, easy to use templates, you can do it without spending a tremendous amount of time each time. You have to determine what kind of data you need. What has changed? How has your systems inventory changed? Did you just implement a new electronic health record? Did you implement a new OR system? Excuse me. What results of existing audits do you have? Have you had some breaches or some near misses in the last year? When's the last time you mapped your PHI? Do you know where your PHI is? Then you complete the risk analysis. And as I say, you establish what I call a risk profile. What are those top risks, and why are they risks? You need to be able to articulate that. The group that's involved needs to be able to articulate that. Determine what information the group needs so that they can analyze and prioritize the risks. And sometimes it's good to actually have an educational session up front as you go into the risk analysis process. If you've got new people, or if you've got people that perhaps are less familiar with the security risk area, you want to give them some education, some information. So that's very, very important. You may want to actually conduct a workshop for some of those key stakeholders and decision makers. You continue, you complete it, you gather the information, whether you do surveys, interviews, I think one-on-one surveys with some key people. Again, senior leaders, but also you want to look at some of the, talk to the front lines. They know what's happening and where the risks are and what could be done differently and what could possibly happen that you wouldn't want to happen. Look at any potential new risks, new technology or a new trend. As I mentioned previously, cybersecurity, big data, some of these concepts are new, but they're not something we would have probably talked about 5 years ago when we were doing a risk analysis. Review and revise your risk profile. It should be an iterative process. Maybe initially you thought that you had a major problem with mobile devices, but maybe as you've gone through the analysis you said, okay, maybe now this is a medium and not a high. So develop that list. I very much say go high, medium, low. Don't get so much into the quantitative because you can spend a lot of time. And the results really probably will not be that different, if at all. Number 9, develop some mitigation plans, some strategies for how you're going to deal with these risks. This becomes a very, very important component, not only if you get audited, but also if you're looking to purchase cybersecurity. Some of the insurance providers now, they want to know more about how you're mitigating risks. You're doing due diligence. Let's say that you're an academic or large medical center and you're acquiring physician practices. When you look at those practices and you consider, do we want to bring this business or this ambulatory care center, do we want to make it part of our, our organization? Are you looking at what they have done with privacy and security? You don't want to get into a situation where you acquire a practice, you find out that they've got a file of patient complaints that have been sitting there for 3 years, they haven't dealt with them. And soon after you acquire the practice, well, guess what? The OCR is in there, got a major fine, a major incident because of their failure to deal with those situations. That is a part of due diligence when you're looking at that. Start with the high risks, develop plans for all risks. How many risks? It depends. It could be a few, it could be a lot. Depends upon how granular you want to get, but also don't bite off more than you can chew. It's better that you have a consistent, ongoing process that works for your organization than that you have a very, very large, complex document that nobody knows about and not much has changed since last year. Make sure, of course, that you incorporate into the budget any resource requirements that are needed for risk mitigation. And if the budget changes, as it often does, and I understand that, I've been there, you budgeted for something, you don't get it, then maybe you need to change, go back and review and revise your mitigation strategies and document that as well. As we know, when it comes to audits, when it comes to outside surveillance, when it comes to investigations, it's all about documentation. So document those results. Develop a very simple, concise, easy way to do this so that you don't have to spend an inordinate amount of time documenting. And of course, report those results, because reporting results, especially more and more to board committees and giving them metrics about your security program, then really enable the board and senior leaders to understand the program better and hopefully to support it more and to provide more resource requirements if they are needed. Monitor how you're mitigating. Have you in fact performed some actions? You've made some changes. What has been the outcome of that? Do you need to re-rank those risks? Do you need to make some other changes? What has changed in the environment? Again, it's very much a strategic planning, ongoing process. And listening to your customers, if you're the security officer, paying attention to what's happening across the institution. How does a change in the safety program or the biomedical program influence security, and so forth. And then revise your documentation as your strategies change. And number 12, in terms of reporting the results, again, make sure that the results are reported in a concise way, in an easy format, but that you are providing results on a regular basis to board or board committee that's charged with responsibility for privacy and security, to management, and to the workforce. If you've made changes, make the communications to the workforce also front and center and ongoing, so that they understand, why you're doing this, why you're doing that, what's important. Remind them about security incidents. What is that? If I see something, what do I do with that? Who do I call? And it doesn't have to be a long educational program. It just needs to be consistent messaging. And then repeat the process. So before I get into the summary, I'm going to turn it over to Lynn. And Lynn, I think you're going to talk to us a little bit about some models here.
Great. Can you hear me okay, Phyllis?
Yes, I can.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you all for attending. I'm going to just take a few quick moments to highlight our Information Security Assessment Manager, which really addresses a lot of the things that Phyllis was discussing as far as conducting a risk analysis. And then, as Phyllis said, I'm going to pass it back to her to finish off and then take any questions and answers. But what we're doing with our Information Security Assessment Manager, or what we call ISAM, is providing a solution to assist organizations in being able to assess their IS risk across the enterprise, and to be able to assess that risk in a way that gives you the opportunity to tailor your assessment. So again, one size doesn't fit all. Everyone's characteristics are going to be a little bit different as far as the size and type and complexity of your organization, and that's going to affect how you conduct assessment within your organization. So the system's going to allow you to take those organizational characteristics into account. It's going to give you the opportunity to pinpoint the content that you want to focus on in conducting an assessment. What we've done with ISAM is we've integrated into it the High Trust Common Security Framework, and Phyllis talked a little bit about high trust in a few of her slides. But that framework takes into account the regulatory and governmental and third-party standards that are out there that affect IS. Things like HIPAA and NIST, ISO, COBIT, PCI, Joint Commission Information Management. There's a wide variety of them. So that in conducting an assessment, if you want to be able to focus in on specific standards, that you have the ability to do so. The way the assessment process works within ISAM is it gives you the ability to start off as far as tailoring your assessment by going through a pre-assessment, which is going to ask you a series of questions to get a better feel for what you want the focus of your assessment to be and some of the factors related to your organization. So when I come into the pre-assessment, I have the opportunity to focus on the organization as far as the assessment I want to conduct, or systems that we might want to assess. So in this case, with an organizational assessment, I'm going to be asked things like if we're a hospital or health system, our bed size, if we're a health plan, our covered lives, if we're a vendor, the number of our employees, things of that nature. Things like, are we located in one state or multiple states? I can be asked system questions if we're going to focus on systems, like what systems do we want to include or exclude from the scope of the assessment, hardware specifications, system factors like the number of users and interfaces and transactions per day, while also giving me the ability to zero in on the standards that I want to focus on. So what we're seeing are all of the standards that make up the Common Security Framework. And I can go through, if I just want to do a HIPAA-focused assessment, be able to just select the Security Rule or the High-Tech Act from the list. If I want to do an ISO-focused assessment, I can select the appropriate standards. And then the system will recommend from that Common Security Framework what controls we should be going through and answering as an organization. And I can assign responsibility for those controls, and I can map them to the appropriate components of our organization, and we can conduct our assessment. And I just want to come in quickly and show you what a control would look like in the system. And for those who might not be of an IT background, the control would very much be the equivalent of a question set. All of the controls are yes/no questions, so the respondent can go through and answer yes or no, partial or not applicable. They can build in comments to further explain or clarify a response. They have the ability to attach supporting documentation, so those could be audit logs, policies or procedures, research that was done to better clarify and justify the answer that they're giving to these questions, and so that information can be tied to them. And we'll also give the respondents the ability to see the standards the questions have been taken from. So if I'm going through and answering these questions, I might be curious as far as where they came from, or I may want to read about it a little bit more in context, or perhaps from an administrative perspective, you're getting a little bit of pushback and people aren't understanding why this is important to them. So when the standards are tied to the questions, they're going to be able to see in this case, this is very much a HIPAA-focused area. State of Mass speaks to this, or perhaps it was COBIT or PCI, that I would be able to see those list of references and then be able to take those citations and read more about these issues if I choose to do so. In going through and answering the questions, I also have the ability to create corrective action plans within the system and to be able to manage those corrective action plans until their completion. In creating corrective action plans, you can get very detailed. You can assign ownership. You can establish due dates for them. You can build in milestones that you need to manage, as well as capturing resource estimates, things like man hours and capital and operational costs that might come into play, and then being able to also attach any supporting documentation, but being able to make sure that the remediation that's going to be necessary based on how these questions are being answered and the results of the assessment, that you can manage that in the system and you have evidence of the things that you're doing to follow up and resolve these issues. And then also giving you the ability to generate reports on everything that you're doing in the system, to be able to analyze the results that are coming into you with these assessments, to be able to present the results to whoever you might need to, whether that's a board or the governing body or any committees, that you have a lot of choice as far as reports, as far as text reporting versus more of a picture report, heat maps, graphs, color-coded reporting, recognizing that depending on who the group is you're presenting to, there's going to be varying levels of technical skill and understanding, and that an individual might not be able to sit and read through a full text report and really understand what your organization is doing and experiencing. But if they can see it in a chart, if they can see it broken down by color, that it's going to make more sense to them. So we have a wide variety of reports that you can work with in the system. And just to give you an idea of what these reports can look like, I just want to quickly open one as an example, and this is a stakeholder report. So again, if you're presenting this to any stakeholders, it's in a Word format, so it can be edited. You can add to it, you can pull out of it. But it's our ISAM Risk Assessment Summary Report. It will be populated with the name of your organization and the date you're generating it on. It's going to have some information, background information as far as what our ISAM product is and a little bit about the content model that's built into it, the High Trust Common Security Framework. There will be a template letter from management that can be edited. And then a little bit about the scope of the assessment, a very high-level summary of findings with a red, yellow, green light type of approach to it where I can clearly see where our strengths versus our weaknesses are. It will then take me into a more detailed summary of our findings where I can see all of the controls we've rolled out and where we rolled them out to or for and what the responses were and if we've created corrective action plans. And then it's going to take me into more of a scorecard type of approach with the red, yellow, green, where I can go through and be able to see broken down by standard that we're assessing what our level of compliance is. So my cloud controls, my security rule, my High-Tech Act, and all of the different standards we assessed in the case of this particular assessment. It will give me some details into any corrective action plans that we've developed so I can see what we've created them for, what problems are we addressing, and resource estimates we've accounted for, and whether these have been completed or not. And then finishing off with some demographics and an index of any supporting documentation that had been tied to answers in the system. So giving me the ability to present this information in different ways depending on the audience and the purpose of the report. But that's what ISAM is designed to do. It's designed to help you with your meaningful use. If that is attestation or ongoing compliance, it's going to be a huge help in response to the Omnibus Rule now and being able to do security risk assessments in the system based off of HIPAA standards, as well as all of the other standards that we're accounting for within the system. So at this point, I am going to turn this back over to Phyllis for some of her final thoughts, and then we can, again, go through any questions and answers that you might have. So Phyllis, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, thank you. We'll just do a quick wrap-up here and then go back to questions. So in summarizing the 12 steps, and you'll notice that we don't actually get to doing the risk analysis, if you will, until the 8th step. So it's very much about a planning methodology up front, planning your approach, understanding the risk appetite, setting very clear objectives, gaining support, enlisting others, and selecting a model. Some of these are not necessarily 1, 2, 3, 4. Some of them are very iterative because you'll be, doing some of them simultaneously. But these are all very, very important before you actually do a risk analysis. And then developing your process, by that, having your work group, your committee, your steering group, whoever is going to be working with you, because again, this is not a one-person exercise. Completing that risk analysis, developing a mitigation plan, documenting results, and then besides documenting the results, you don't just stop there and wait and come back the next year or the next cycle. You want to monitor, the mitigation that you put in place or that you're planning to put in place. Is that effective, or do you need to change your strategies? Again, change something throughout the cycle. And then very, very important is reporting the results. And as Lynn demonstrated, some of the information that you get out of a system such as ISAM also allows you to report results in a very, very clear, very concise way, and the people will understand and be able to use that information. Because it's very, very important that you not only report results, take credit for all the work that's been done, but use that as a monitoring over time to see how, in fact, your program is changing, how you're stepping up to meet risks, how risks are changing, and also just the long-term approach that you're taking to this program, that this is not a one-time exercise, that this is an ongoing part of a very, very major and important program that you have. And with that, my comments are over, but we can move to some additional questions if there are any.
There are. Hi, Phyllis. Sorry about that. This is Maria, and we do have a question. Are there legal requirements for the frequency of a security risk analysis after the initial review?
No, there are no legal requirements. And again, I'll go back to the fact that the security rule is very open-ended, and that is very purposeful. Because again, an annual process or a biannual, it changes. It depends not only on your organization, but it depends upon new trends, depends upon what's happening out there in the environment, new technology, and so forth. It's really up to you to determine as an organization what makes the most sense for you. You may want to do different elements of your risk analysis on a less than annual basis or a more than annual basis, if you will. Again, this should be an iterative, ongoing, dynamic process. So, it's not the concept of doing a risk analysis report this year, putting it on the shelf, and then next year doing another one and so forth. It's an ongoing process, and it's something that should be also discussed on a regular basis with your work groups. So, and there is no legal requirement that says you must do it at X times or so forth. No.
Great, thank you. Another question for you, Phyllis, before we have actually two questions for Lynn. Phyllis, what is your opinion of using the NIST 800-53 publication as a means to measure and access current security controls in place and use that evaluation as the risk assessment process in a healthcare entity?
That is a good one. All of the NIST information is very good. You can certainly use that, and you can focus on those controls. I will say, though, that it's not covering all of those other aspects of the security rule that you may want to include. But you certainly can get a long way down the road by using NIST. And depending upon the level of sophistication and of the organization, the number of resources and staff that you have, you can do more or less with it. But NIST is a wonderful foundation, and their controls are very, very good. They also can map. Many of those map to the security rule. I've done a mapping of FIPS 200 and NIST and security rule, and you'll see that many of those do map quite well. And that's another reason why security rule alone is not sufficient. So yes, NIST is definitely a good process to use, good documents to use, and they also have some really good templates that you can use as well for incident planning and so forth. So, but I would take, you need to take the best of each, so to speak, and just in terms of security, just make sure that your program is reflecting the language of the HIPAA security rule, because remember that, that's what OCR is looking for, and that's what others are looking for. But it's one component, but a very, very important component.
So Phyllis, with that being said, another question came in. So what about COBIT, C-O-B-I-T? Is that better than NIST?
Okay. I'll say, yeah, neither one is not better than the other. In terms, COBIT is geared more towards auditors, but COBIT does provide this IT framework. COBIT speaks more in the language of technology. NIST, I would, if I had a choice of one or the other, and if I were in most of the healthcare entities today, by that I don't mean the small ones, I mean like a decent-sized hospital, physician group, whatever, I would probably use NIST more than I would use COBIT. However, I would use some of the COBIT principles, and certainly if I had an internal audit department that could assist me, I would use more of COBIT.
Thanks, Phyllis. The next question is for Lynn. Lynn, can a HIPAA implementation specification audit protocol be uploaded to ISAM?
Well, we can certainly work with you as far as perhaps assessments you've done in the past to try and get those into the system to manage moving forward. You certainly have the ability within ISAM to add in your own additional content. So if there are things that we're not addressing within ISAM that you want to be able to build in and assess, that you have the ability to do that as well. What we can do is you will most likely be contacted by a sales rep from your region to follow up, and if it's something that you would like to schedule a call with that we can discuss with you, then we're happy to do that. And for anyone that would like to see a more detailed demo, we're certainly happy to do that as well.
Thanks, Lynn. And actually, we are getting questions about cost and consulting and support as it relates to the ISAM product. So as Lynn had mentioned, we will have a representative contact you after today's presentation. I do have another question for you, Lynn, and maybe you, hopefully you know this answer. Has ISAM been used on any recent HIPAA audits? Do you know of any?
I am more the front-end person, so I can't say for certain, but I would, if I was going to give you an educated guess, I would say yes. Because what I'm finding when I'm talking to organizations that are looking at this, everyone seems to have an initial use in mind, something that they want to start off with, something that's the most pressing to them to be able to use the system to assess. And that was for a nice spell, meaningful use, and it's still certainly with stage 2 an area of importance. But more often than not, the organizations I talk to are looking at it because they really have a need to jump in and start to assess HIPAA. So I would assume the answer to that would be yes. If it's not the first thing they're doing in the system, it's right up there as far as priorities for being able to do assessment within the application.
Thank you, Lynn. I want to be mindful of everyone's time and thank everyone for attending Security Risk Analysis, 12 Steps to Meaningful Results. If there are any questions that went unanswered in today's presentation, Phyllis will take the time, give her about a couple of weeks to answer all questions in their entirety, and they will be sent back to us, and we will have those posted. There will be a recording for today's presentation. It will be available on our Medi-blog. And then last, CEUs that are associated with today's webinar. CEUs from HCCA and AHIMA will be available to you tomorrow afternoon. They will be sent to all registered attendees as well as a survey. Please take the time to fill out the survey. We want to make sure that we meet all of your needs as it relates to addressing any hot topics that are in the industry and presenting them to you in a webinar. We want to thank everyone for attending, and we wish you a pleasant day. Thank you.